Okay, let's do this thing. Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to the Asia Tech Podcast. Swapna and Nirmal David, the co-founders of Hobo Interactive, are with me today. I cannot thank both of you enough for coming here and do this. It's really great to have you here. How are you both doing today?
Oh, it's fantastic, Michael. We've waited, I think, weeks now to finally align our dates and be here. So this is really great. I'm very happy. And today's like a very historic day in India's history too. And I'm in India right now. So it makes all the more sense that today's the day that we are doing the podcast finally.
I'm super excited about it. Before we jump into the main part of this conversation, can we just get a little bit of both of your backgrounds for some context? And Swapna, why don't we start with you?
Michael, I started my life in film production. So say 2 decades ago,
Wow.
I started doing documentaries and then moved on through the big bad world of Bollywood films and loved it and thoroughly enjoyed it. And then moved on to the UK and US film industries. So we've always been storytellers. Nirmal's my brother. And as kids, we were very hyper kids. And I think it was our mother's way of kind of keeping us calm by telling us stories and engaging us with stories. So we've always been storytellers. Everything is a story for us. Funny story, not so funny story, but usually it's all funny and funny story, engaging stories. That's been where we've always been. So it's, I think, was organic for us to get into this industry. I started with film industry and Nirmal did film industry too. And then he's an Academy Award winning VFX specialist. And then we kind of finally set up shop and started Hobo Interactive. So it's been a very interesting journey of storytelling so far.
Nirmal?
Similar but different. I decided to be an animator when I was in 9th grade or something. I think I was 12 or 13.
Wow.
Well, back in the day, no one knew what animation was in India. So my mother obviously freaked out a little bit. She's like, what? You want to be a what again? But anyway, so luckily, I met the right people, was, sometimes in the right place at the right time, but also worked really hard. Got to, do some amazing stuff in my career. I worked with Rhythm and Hues for 7 years. I was animation lead on Golden Compass, which won the Academy Award for VFX. Been part of many, I think about 10 features or something, 10 or 12 features, plus short films, TV series. After that, I went on to Clone Wars with Lucasfilm in Singapore. And then I moved to Jakarta to be client-side animation director on a feature film. And throughout that time, I have been working on ideas and IPs. Like Swapna said, we've had storytelling in our genes right from the beginning. Eventually, things got to a point where game making was reachable to people without super giant budgets. And that's when I decided to come back to India and set up Hobo Interactive with Swapna.
Can you talk to me a little bit about not just the intersection, but the sort of continuation of animation into gaming, right? Because I don't think they're that far away. And the movie business feels like it's one of the largest entertainment businesses in the world, but I feel like if my numbers are right, that actually gaming is bigger from a pure monetary standpoint. And that if you want to be in sort of the animation and visual effects business, it may be even better or more fun to be in the gaming business. Can you just talk about that progression a little bit more for me, please?
For every gamer will tell you that one game that changed his or her life, right? When the transformation happened from, we all started by playing Atari and Pac-Man. It was a mechanic. It wasn't a story for us, right?
No.
We were only as engaged as when we were holding a system and like moving stuff around. It's a high score, or, you beat your brother, things like that. But now there are these games that come in and just change your perception of gaming. For me, that game was a game called Half-Life, which was, back in the day. And it was just a shooter, right? Like many other shooters, like Doom and everything. But there was a story angle. I fell in love with the character, right? For the first time, I felt like I moved with the protagonist way more than I did in any movie.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's different than being in a movie, right? Which is more, what's the right word? You're just watching as opposed to being involved. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and you're actually influencing the progress of a story as well, right?
Yeah.
And at that point, something went off in my head. I think this was late 90s, maybe 99 or something, or early 2000s, where I felt like the medium of games can have way more powerful storytelling tools than films. Films are great, of course, but for certain kind of thing. And I think gaming basically expands that horizon to another level. And like you said, the numbers, yeah, absolutely. The gaming industry is, I think, a couple of $1 billion above Bollywood in time. Like, it's not even like a few million or something. It's like a massive massive jump, right? But there's also associated hardware sales and things like that. But I think in terms of storytelling, non-linear is the way to go because you are the hero. It's not like watching somebody do something. You know how it ends once. You see that movie once and you know how it ends, and that's that. But in games, the ending can be different each time, right? So it's like a replayability. You keep coming back to it, right? And then you get more and more sucked into the world. So for me, world building is the first thing when it comes to any storytelling, right? It's not about just one mechanic or one story or one incident. It's about the world that character inhabits and the character itself. So I think games are the most powerful medium for that, and so that's when that shift happened. But sometime back it was unreachable to be a game developer.
Yeah.
Unless you had a serious budget. But coming up the app stores and things changed that, so got more democratized.
I would say that in the media space where I operate, it's almost the same thing. I've been following the projection of the media business for the last 30 years. And when the technology allowed me to do it, which meant that I didn't need $1 billion to sort of build a studio all over the world.
Exactly.
I did the same thing. And I feel the same way you do about storytelling. I don't think a story is linear and you want to participate in it. And I love this idea, right? If you want, even your favorite movie, go back to some of them, Casablanca, The Godfather, you're really just watching. And there are times where you'd like to say, what would happen if the character did this? But in the gaming world, you're actually driving that. You are, in a way, an extension of that character. And being able to do that and impact that story has to be super cool, particularly in the development of it, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah. Of course, it comes with its own challenge.
Sure.
Because now you are doing branching narratives, so it's not like one linear storyboard that works for every case. But it's also exciting because as a storyteller, you can change the narrative on the fly, which is amazing, which you can't do in a movie, right?
No.
And, like depending on who the gamer is, the nature of the story and how they perceive the story changes, which happens in movies as well, culturally. I think in games, it's a bit more involved and more visceral as well, right? You're actually experiencing it on the fly, and which is really good. I love that.
I want to make one more point, and then I want to move into dig a little bit deeper into what's driving the growth in the gaming industry. Like one of my other favorite movies, The Departed, right? This is a Martin Scorsese movie.
Yeah.
In the middle, I know the whole story because I've watched it like 1,000 times. I'm not sure I should admit that. But it means I can walk away in the middle of that and go get some soda water or go get some ice cream or whatever it is and come back and know exactly where I'm supposed to be. In a game, you're either playing it or you're not. You're either in it or you're not.
Absolutely.
Right. So it's way more immersive. Sorry, Swapna, you were saying?
No, I agree with you. And with the game, it can get very obsessive. I'm a gamer myself. I mean, we're all gamers naturally, but it's again a story that I'm not so proud of. But somewhere in 2005, I spent 6 months at home just playing games. That's when I got introduced to video games, and I just got sucked in completely. I was doing RTS games, so Age of Empire, Empire Earth, and I had civilizations to build and empires to destroy and create. So I couldn't leave the house. I had to sit at home, and it was all consuming. And that's the joy that I think only games can give you. It's really all consuming, and it becomes your life.
I love it. I had empires to build and civilizations to develop. What a great thing to say. Yeah, that definitely doesn't happen in a movie per se. Okay, let's talk about some details. When you look at the state of the gaming industry today, and even particularly in Asia and in India, if you want to talk about that, what's driving this growth and what does that growth look like to you today?
Okay, so Michael, first off, everybody's online. Or everybody, especially in Asia, if you walk around, you can see, irrespective of class and income levels, everyone has access to smartphones. So inexpensive smartphones, the easy availability of internet, and the massive consumer base for these internet services. This has opened up a huge requirement for content, a need for content, and for new entertainment options. This has led then to substantial increase in the entertainment market, and including mobile entertainment and gaming. So while the gaming industry's growth in Asia and India has been largely due to the expanding middle class, it's also really because of the inexpensive mobile technology and the affordable data plans. All this has contributed to a larger entertainment audience and definitely a more engaged gaming audience. So gaming has grown from a niche hobby, say, into one of the biggest industries in the entertainment sector. And it's reached about 200 million in 2023. That's a huge number, 200 billion, in just, I think in the last 5 years, there's been a sizable jump. Till 2019, US was the most lucrative video game market, but it's now been replaced by China in 2022. So the Asia Pacific has clearly emerged as a very strong market for video games. If I may say so, Michael, in turn, all these changes have also changed the profile of the gamer significantly. So as you know, video games are no longer just children and teens. All the Nintendo and Sega kids are now in their 30s and 40s who grew up playing video games are now adults who love playing video games. And with this growth of mobile industry too, people of all ages are coming and enjoying games. So the average age of the game player now is 35 years. Another very exciting thing for me personally also is that globally, the male to female gamer ratio is close to 50-50.
Is it really?
That's incredible. Yes. And the female gamer segment has skyrocketed. And today it represents a massive 48% of the entire global gaming market. 48% are women.
Is there a difference in the types of games or the specific games that men and women play? And can you then develop specific games for those specific segments, particularly because, as Nirmal was saying earlier, the technology now is way less expensive to do it, right? So instead of developing a AAA game, which is also possible inexpensively, you can build mobile games that are more impactful for different cohorts. Is that fair to say?
Sure. So especially within the mobile gaming sector, that's where the changes become massive, where women have gotten majorly. The women aged 35 years and older, they are now driving the growth within mobile gaming.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? And older female segments are becoming more prominent. So reports now suggest that women have started to align game time as fun, productive, useful way of spending their me time. So as a result, the types of mobile games targeting women are changing. See, earlier in the history of gaming, women had to adapt to games. But now women are recognized as a sizable chunk of the gaming audience, and games are being specifically designed for the sector. So say stronger narrative characters with whom they can identify, stories that reflect common themes. And Nirmal will tell you more, but female players value problem solving, challenge, growing, and strategic thinking aspects in the games they play.
You mean just like in real life?
Yeah.
Yeah, like one of the fun things, like my 70-year-old aunt, you have to wait for a break when she stops playing Candy Crush to have a conversation with her. Right? She never touched a game in her life.
Why would she though?
Right?
Because from her perspective back then, if she watched somebody on a console, right? And you said this at the beginning. At the beginning, there was no story. Like I used to play Pong at my cousin's house. This was really boring, like two white lines and a white thing going back and forth. And you're right. My grandmother would walk by and just go, "What are you doing?" And you have to, in retrospect, agree with her. But go ahead, right? Because if your 70-year-old aunt is playing games, there must be a reason why.
The nature of, like when Swapna said, the nature of the gamer has changed, right?
Yeah.
It's got two effects, and one which I particularly love. I grew up playing every game that any other kid has access to, right? It was mostly violence, right? You were either killing monsters or no matter what type of game you were playing, it was always that, whether it's even a, D&D type, Dungeons and Dragons type thing, or a shooter, or whatever you were doing. It was mostly war. It was mostly in that sense. And then, of course, there were these small offshoots of other things where strategy was involved and, storytelling was involved, puzzle were involved, but they were super niche, like super, super niche, right? What we call the geek bench sort of, game market, right? Even gamers themselves were considered like, oh, he's a geek,
Right.
he just plays games. That has changed now because of mobile. What's happened is games like, Angry Birds and Candy Crush, which had such a mass outreach of people commuting, waiting for stuff, just pick it up, it's engaging, why not? They seem to think that it keeps their brain wired and moving and it's helping them in some way.
Yeah.
So, they got into it, but that also had an offshoot effect, which is the gaming audience matured. Like basically the people who are playing this suddenly realize that, oh, there's one more game which is slightly different. Let me go try that. And slowly, people started becoming gamers as well. So they started picking up consoles, PCs. Like I know so many people who are older who never gamed before, who started with mobile and now are doing like hardcore simulation games with thousands of dollars worth of equipment to drive cars and fly planes and, all kinds of stuff, VR. It's moving slowly. So that basically gave us a wider audience to expand and experiment with stuff as well. Like with the female audience, one of the best things is there are so many non-violent games out there now. I love it. Right? You can choose what you want to play. What do you feel like engaging yourself with? That option is now much wider. Before it wasn't.
It used to be that people would use their me time, as Swapna referenced, to just like watch a series, a television series. And whether that television series was on Thursday night at 8 o'clock, which was common in the United States as a big watching time, or on Saturday morning, They would spend that time doing that, and nobody thought that was strange, right? Because there was also this big community around. If you watch something on Thursday night, at least in the US, you'd wake up on Friday morning, go to work, and say, "Did you see Friends last night?" And everybody would know it and talk about it. Are you seeing some of these more casual games, which are complex as well, but still replacing some of that television watching, which I feel like almost no one does anymore? Maybe they'll binge watch a series on Netflix, but take the time then to play a game, which then they then discuss with their friends. Hey, did you get to level 17 on this thing? Does that happen now as well?
Absolutely, yeah. So you remember the good old days of cheat books? They used to publish books where you had cheat codes and how to solve level 5 in Doom or whatever. Well, now everything is online and Discord channels, right? But people do discuss it. Like I've seen, I forgot when this was, but at a wedding, people my aunt's age looking at something on the phone, and they were talking. So I figured it must be pictures of grandkids or, no, it was actually some sort of a game like Candy Crush, but another, similar game. And they were actually talking strategy. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? that was an audience that I have never expected to see in gaming, right?
Can you also introduce games then for, I don't want to say necessarily for 70-year-old ladies, but if the time to development and the cost of development is gradually just continuously getting lower, is it also possible now that you hear your aunt discussing with her friends the strategy for a game to kind of get some insights from them and particularly target a market that's like 65 and above?
Yes. And I'll tell you another surprising thing. So we have this new genre. Well, it's not a new genre. It's been around, in the vein of, remember the Tamagotchi toys, the one where you feed the pets, right? So there are, Japan had a, massive subculture of stuff that we never saw otherwise.
Yeah.
But, now
remember I lived there, so I saw the whole Tamagotchi thing.
Oh, yeah. Right. But, we had real pets. People had digital pets at the time in India, but, but there are relaxing games where you go in not to feel tense, but to really calm yourself down, right? There are something as simple as a love story, which is an interactive love story where you can change the outcome a little bit. It's a very short playtime, but it's got such an overwhelmingly high, response on Steam and mobile and everywhere. But there are games like that which change the nature of how we approach it, right? So, for example, most teenage people, they love to get games which is really quick, fast, testing their reflexes, usually involves a little bit of violence, but it's a lot of competing, right? But a lot of the other ones, like I know for sure, Swapna didn't say it, but I know for sure she loves this game where she's feeding cats and more cats are coming into the garden. And, I know she does it. She's not saying it because it's not cool, but it is true, right? She's obsessed with that too. Like, oh, how many cats came to my garden and ate the food, right? That stuff. But surprisingly, older audience actually wants a bit more thrill than the people who are in the middle section. So I see more and more, like I play a lot of a game called Arma 3, which is like a military simulation, and it's like one of the best military simulations, right? And there's a lot of community around it, so it's less about the game and more about the community. But I see more and more people, when I hear the voices on chat, suddenly it's like deeper, more mature voices from the real younger audience that I started playing with 10 years ago. There's a big difference, right? People are actually talking strategy, asking people to calm down and think. It's a great thing. And I think in that audience, they actually accept way more experimentation than the teenagers do.
This is actually a really interesting progression for me. If you used to sit at home, this is before we all had the connectivity, right? You could play the game in the basement. You were essentially playing by yourself. Like I remember we used to play Dungeons and Dragons on a board, right? And that was kind of cool. But we had to get together with like 5 or 6 friends to do it, either at my house or at your house or whatever it was. So that was kind of interactive. But video games at some level, even the what do you call them? The FPS, the first-person shooters in these violence games, right? Were very individualistic, at least at the beginning. But now you can literally be playing with people you know, people you don't know. And I like this statement that you made. It's less about the game and more about the community, because I think that's true about kind of everything that we do that's good, if that makes sense, right? And if that community is a strong community, there are great things that can come out of it on top of the game.
Exactly. Like, in fact, I see that the biggest communities are built around games that approach sandbox mentalities, right? Where you give the player the ability to do whatever they really want with all the physics and stuff. So, for example, in Arma, one of the biggest things is on the Steam Workshop, the amount of custom missions people build are just incredible. It's beyond levels that normal AAA studios do sometimes.
Right.
right? In fact, you must have heard of this very famous game called PUBG, right? Which is like it's the biggest thing. PUBG started off as a mod for Arma,
As a mod.
right?
Yeah.
Somebody created a mod which was basically the exact thing as PUBG, and then later it became like people figured that that whole genre has a massive audience, and then it went on to become its own game, right? And now everything from Fortnite to all those games follow that same basic pattern. Community is definitely one of the strongest things in gaming.
But having said that, in this community, women are not a very strong force. So the women tend to be not so much of online players because of the whole being vulnerable to all kinds of
Well, Gamergate, we
cyber
remember,
attacks.
yeah.
Yes. And the behavior towards a woman player can be quite nasty and quite aggressive. So I think women tend to do less online games. So the community that we're talking about does not really have a major presence of women in it. It's more a male-driven community, while the game played by women also. So that's why there's been a shift in the games for women and this whole other sectors developed.
I understand. I want to talk a little bit more about Hobo Interactive. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the games that you're developing, the portfolio that you're building, and how that is going to capitalize on this discussion we've been having at scale about this indie game market.
So Hobo Interactive, it's Nirmal and me, of course, but it's way more than that. Our partners are, let's say, legends and giants in the industry, VFX industry. We've been very, very lucky to have worked with the best in the world, and then to have them have the same dreams as us and join us and work together to build this whole massive dream now that we are on, called Hobo Interactive. So our Hobo's slate of games have been developed from our engaging story-rich worlds. We started with creating the world of Bot Rods first. That's the first game that's coming out, Bot Rods. It's an arcade-style racer game that's ready for release. And that game is what brought our other partners together and expanded the company and the partnership into a larger structure that we are right now. So we're based in the UK, but we have a strong presence in India. Our production team earlier was completely in India, different cities in India, remotely a lot, and based also in Hyderabad. Our COO is a VFX legend. Our other creative, so between the Nirmal and Dilip Verma, who is head of VFX company Rhythm and Hues in India when they won Life of Pi, and the rest of our creative partners who've all worked on The Mummy, The Golden Compass, Night in the Museum, Alvin and Chipmunks, they have about 3 Academy wins and about nearly 10 nominations. So that's the kind of people who have now on our team working with us creating these games. So we started with the world's first, like really engaging story-rich worlds. That was our key focus. And then from that, we created the world of the games. So Bot Rods the game first, and then while we're gearing up for Bot Rods game 2, we're also developing a 3-season Bot Rod series, because we have all these stories of the worlds and the characters that we want to bring out there. Apart from the Bot Rods IP, we have a platformer IP, which will have a game first.
15 years ago, if I remember the timing right, you had a game called Tomb Raider.
Yes.
And then they made a movie about it, right?
Yes.
Lara Croft Tomb Raider, whatever. I don't remember exactly. But what you're suggesting is you're doing this in reverse now. My mistake. You're doing the same thing. So you're building this game, but you're taking all your movie and your entertainment, your like traditional entertainment experience, and saying, we're going to build this whole infrastructure around every game that we do, because the commitment to the storytelling is not just to make it a game, but to storytell on multiple surfaces that are related to each other. So you're doing the Bot Rod game and then building a series at the same time?
Yeah. So like I said, the world of these IPs are most interesting for us. So we created the world of characters and their stories. From that world, the game has been derived and the series has been derived, and the feature film will come out of it, and graphic novels, and the merchandise, of course, the merchandise. We have such cute, engaging merchandise that we are ready to go. So all this has come from the world of IPs that we've created, and we are like very IP rich, if I may say so. We've had these stories we've been dying to bring out, and so now, like I said, apart from the Bot Rods IP, we have a platformer IP, and then there's a third-person action adventure IP that will have a series coming out first. So we don't always do the game first. So we do a series first for some IP, then bring out the game, depending on the whole genre.
I did a lot of reading on this about 10 years ago around George Lucas and the development of sort of the Star Wars universe, where before he made any of the movies, he had like hundreds, if not thousands of characters that were going to exist in this universe that he made.
Right.
And that the merchandising and the movie and all of these things that he did were already built kind of before the movies were made. I don't know, it just kind of sounds like you're doing the same thing. But again,
Exactly. Yeah.
Lucas took I mean, I don't want to swear, but you know what I mean, a ton of risk, because back then, just to create any of that was so expensive. You're taking advantage of this like less expensive infrastructure building to build these stories in the universe first, and then build all these little pieces in the middle of it, which sounds really cool. But again, for the audience to understand, it means that the opportunity that you're building is not just a gaming opportunity. It's an IP opportunity, which is a completely different story. Sorry, Nirmal, go ahead.
Yeah, so for me, both are interlinked. Being a gamer myself and an animator, I'm in both worlds. But for me, both are a completely interlinked thing. Like there are so many games which has a very interesting mechanic, but once you do that and then you stop playing, you leave it. It's out of your mind.
Yep.
Right. And then when you pick it up again and you feel like trying that out, and it's just experiential. But I think games are like, our stories built in a world. You should be able to carry it with you where you go.
Yeah.
Like there are games which just made me cry. Like really, like there are games which I've had to stop playing because it got too depressing for me. Like I got so affected by the decisions that I made that I had to stop playing them. Right. It really bothered me. I couldn't sleep, especially there was this one particular one, if it's okay to say a name, called This War of Mine. It's a very simple side scroller kind of thing where you're managing a bunch of people trying to survive a war, right? You're not actively going about killing people or anything. You're just hiding in a house. And then at night, you go out and scrounge for resources and you come back. And sometimes when you're back, some raiders might have taken over the place and somebody is hurt, somebody's got an illness. So you have to make a decision sometimes, like, do I give this guy medicine or do I give that guy food?
Right.
And people die in your watch, right? So it's and you start relating with them because you're looking at them at such close proximity all the time. And so the nature of that, like for me, I get really sucked into that story and I get really affected by the characters, right? So it's a similar thing. Like I feel like the world needs to be rich for any part of that to be believable or to be really engaging, right? So if you just say, I found a mechanic, some kind of a physical thing, which is great. And then trying to force a game around it for me feels less intuitive and less engaging than actually having a really rich world where everything is got, its roles to play. There are multiple different stories happening. And then you choose like one section and you have a thing that you go through, right? But while you're doing that, you see the other branches. You see that world is, really real, and then it becomes way more visceral for you. So, we look at it from that point of view, rather than, just a game mechanic. Let's make a game out of that. It's not that.
I don't think we are also unusual in doing this, though this is like our key strength. There are other games which, like Nirmal said, have been doing this. For example, Monument Valley, if I may say, talk about Monument Valley was for me very deeply immersive game. It's a casual game, but I felt like I lived the character's life and went through it. And I, like Nirmal said, I stopped and cried because there was a whole sense of loss and grieving, and it was a very powerful game. And that comes from a powerful story in the background. It's not just about the moves I've made or the couple of strokes that have gone into it. It's the whole story and the world that it's come from. So that's very, very important now to engage a gamer.
So you just mentioned the word engage. Again, you're not just building games. It's way more than that, right? And sure, other people have done it, but it feels to me like the way you're doing it is really unique. And also your approach to it, coming from multiple Academy Award winning people coming into this business, which shocks me, to be fair. It means that it sounds to me like there's this secular change going on, where people that have been very interested in telling stories at scale and have won awards for telling those stories are now moving into another place where they can tell bigger, more expansive, more immersive, more continuous stories, and they're on your team. But you mentioned the word engage, Swapna, and I'm curious if there's a way, because of the way you're employing technology and the way that everybody has a mobile phone, that you can also engage with the gamers themselves on a regular basis to keep them as part of that community, and maybe even let the gamers engage with each other in a way that's positive. We don't want Gamergate. This is horrible stuff, right? But if they can engage with each other, they should spend more time doing it, which is better for the game itself, yeah?
One of the, I think, important things for me is, like I said, the sandbox environment, or where the community is building stuff, which sometimes becomes bigger than the game itself, right? Where the game essentially becomes like a backend for people to just meet and do some fun stuff, but they're actually doing something much bigger than, the game itself, or the game even intended to begin with, right? So many developers will tell you that we put this mechanic in there thinking that, oh, we just needed to fill that gap, but it became like the key thing that brought people together and changed the nature of the, way they approach the game itself. So I think there are two things here. One is that communities are different. Like we are mostly, in a Western centric gaming environment.
Fair enough.
Where majority of the games are produced in the West, at least the blockbusters are, right? The big ones. But communities in Asia are very different because culturally our, what would you call it? Our priorities and the way we look at life, the philosophies are very different.
Very.
So I feel like there is, like in India, for example, gaming is still niche in the sense that not in the mobile gaming market. I'm talking about like a little bit in the AA, AAA industry. It's still niche. One, because of, just the rising middle class is still not caught on to the idea that an Xbox is a worth it investment. And that's still changing though. It's becoming normal now to walk into a house and see a console, which wasn't the case in the 90s or the 80s, right? We were very lucky to have an Atari at home, which was like crazy back then, thinking about it in the 80s.
Yes.
But a whole bunch of people now give their kids consoles, whereas in India, the mentality is like they should be studying to become engineers, doctors, that's bankers, whatever it is, right? So suddenly getting a console for your kid is not considered a sin, which is of bad parenting, which is amazing for me, right? Because there are so many things that develop from there, including your brain. So, gaming is not just doing shit for no reason. You actually do engage your brain, and it is expansive in some way or the other. But culturally, there are differences, and I still feel like the community outreach that comes from games is not addressing those. And I think there is a big gap there in terms of how communities are built in a Western-centric way. And, if I may say so, but I think in Asia, there's still a gap. And I think that still slows down the rate at which people are coming into the market or becoming target audience. And I think that's a really something we could tap strongly because we are Asian. We understand that, we understand the philosophical background they come from, and to really engage with them in that way, I think that's going to be a big game changer as well.
Also, if you look at the Hobo family and our extended associations and partners, all of us bring with us a wealth of global cultural experiences.
Yeah.
That goes a long way into what we're talking about. So we have been able to recognize potential in diverse emerging markets very easily. So we have been committed to creating games that reflect multiple cultures and preferences. So this strategy also has like partnering with cultural advisors and designing games with diverse characters and culturally rich settings, but also it's about organizing inclusive community events, like to connect with players worldwide. For example, events in Abu Dhabi, UAE, which is very big in gaming right now, or Bangkok, apart from, say, UK, Europe, and the US circuit of events.
Do you see yourself doing game-specific events or Hobo-specific events in a way not to compete with, but to kind of mirror like what Amazon does for their AWS Invent, what Google does for I/O and stuff like that, where you're literally getting a bunch of people in a room and saying, here's what we've done last year, here's what we expect to do this year, and here's how we expect to help you engage with us and work with our games, right?
Right. So one of the cool things about Bot Rods is it brings back the old days of, sitting with your friends in one room and playing with each other, right? And I think having like a competitive esports Bot Rods thing will be a great thing to do. And that's something I'm really looking forward to. Playing with someone online, yes, that's fine. You do that and then you get off. But when you're playing with friends in the same room, it's a completely different vibe, right? And I think Bot Rods is a prime example of bringing that vibe back, and I'm really looking forward to that. It should be great as a community event per se.
Yeah,
it would be great.
Also for families to play. The thing about Bot Rods, if you have an adult video game lover in a house with children, it's the best game possible. It's an arcade racer. It's not violent. It's aggressive, but not violent. It's competitive, but it's high adrenaline, but it's not really negative in any sense of. It has a female protagonist.
I want to come a little bit full circle here, but I feel like the two of you grew up in a non-traditional house in India. Is that a fair thing to say?
Absolutely.
I was in India in 2017 for a startup conference, and there was a young man on stage talking about building an ed tech company. And he said very casually, there are only 3 things an Indian person can become. A doctor, which is one of the things you mentioned, an engineer, which is the other thing you mentioned, and a family disappointment. So,
Yeah.
but I feel like you are not a disappointment to your family.
So,
Besides all the other things that happened to you, like what was it like being from a family that was so alternative and then growing up and then going to Hollywood, going to Bollywood, winning these awards and doing things that nobody else around you was doing? Even you said like visual effects and the stuff that you were doing, animation, wasn't even kind of known in India when you first started doing this. Can you just go back for me a little bit and talk to me about like what was it like growing up being so different from everybody else? Because your friends must have thought your parents are insane.
yeah, well, since you used the word insanity, I should tell you, my dad was a psychotherapist, and he actually ran a hospital for 30 years or so, right?
Great.
And in fact, there was a rumor in school that, I think his dad started the hospital because he's bonkers,
I got it.
right? And I found out that when I was in ninth grade or something, when people got closer to me, they were like, we really thought you were bonkers for a while there, right? But that's because my way of looking at things were very different. I was always trying to create things when people were trying to get into fights. It was like a very different kind of environment.
Yeah.
One thing we had at home was nobody stopped us from trying anything new.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody ever said, don't do that, or don't say this, or don't watch that. Nothing. You do what you want and you learn your lessons.
Yeah.
Right. So there was always the building block. And I think one amazing thing for us was that Swapna is not that much older than me. Right. She's only like 2.5 years older, right? Even though I look way better, but she's not, that much older than me. But
is that
we
okay?
always grew up as no.
It's such a sibling thing to say.
Believe me, I've got a younger brother, and he once said to me, "I don't understand how you ever get a girlfriend being as ugly as you are." Anyway, so I get
exactly, yeah. So it's the same.
Same.
As mine.
So this
Anyway,
line about being better looking, we always get it in. It's like who gets in there faster. That's all.
Yeah, that's all.
Who says
I just did it before she did. But anyway, so one of the good things about that was we hung out together. We had the same friends.
Right.
But it's like going back home, but also having your friend with you, right? She can totally be a bossy sister when she wants to, don't get me wrong. But there was always that thing of building stuff together and, coming up with ideas together. I'm assuming that people around us must have looked at our parents and said, maybe this is not the way you should be bringing your kids up, right? That there was definitely something there. Like Swapna will tell you, we actually started making our own language when I was like 2 or 3 or something. And Swapna was like 6. And well, you should tell that, Swapna, because you were the initiator of the idea.
For some reason, I was a very early reader. I started reading very early newspapers, and so by age 6, I was reading the daily newspaper, and I was quite a voracious reader. And I decided at it's actually 5.5 that the problem the world was having was that we had too many languages. So I decided that we should invent a new language. So Nirmal and I sat together. So whatever words Nirmal would come up with as a 2.5, 3-year-old would be the new word for, say, rain or whatever. And then at some point we figured, it needs a grammar to make a sentence. And we really got quite far. Obviously, our parents are quite thrilled and they thought we were onto something amazing, but that didn't go far. But we've always been creating our own worlds, to say stories in our own words. That's words. That's been the key thing, the stories and what we wanted to say. And we were just generally excited. And from our parents, I think what I really need to say is, Nirmal did touch on the topic. What they've given us really is fearlessness in terms of fearless dreaming. I've never heard my father say, but you can't do that because this might happen or you might fail. We've had zero failure of fear of failure. So having the complete lack of fear of failure, that's like a huge strength to give a child.
Yeah.
Neither of us have ever thought, what if we do this and it doesn't work? That's never been our thought process. It's always been, let's do this and then maybe we can do this and then we should do this. It's always been how we lived our entire life. And at some point, that does work. So if something doesn't work, you just find another way to go about it or go around a path and then say, it doesn't work. We go do something else. It's never a question of failing and, what's happening. And it's always like, oh my God, there's so much to do and so many stories to say and so many people to meet. And it's always been that. So we've been very lucky with our parents and the way we've been brought up.
Yeah, and dreaming big, I think we take it for granted. But when I went out of home and started meeting people in college in other parts of India, I realized how big a difference that is. Like I still remember, starting a band when we were like 13 or 12 or something. And then my mother was like, what's your intention with this? And I was like, what do you mean? We're going to get the Grammy next year. What other intention is there?
Why are you asking?
What other intention is there? Like, why are you asking? Like, I'm insulted that you're asking. right?
No,
But
so,
that
Michael, I
power,
must say this story. Sorry, I must interrupt for the story. So, growing up, we were always convinced that we were going to get our Academy Awards, individual ones. And as an older sister, I always seemed to have more pocket money than Nirmal, and I would be always funding his life. Right. So, and we fight all the time. So, during one fight, Nirmal said, when I get my Academy Award, I will not thank you. So, this he must have been like maybe 11 or something. And I was 13 or 14. So, I said, oh, since we were kids and we had no idea that the academy would send you tickets or whatever, we had no idea, right? So I said very confidently, oh, but then I'm not going to give you the money to go get the ticket to go for the academy award. So how are you going to not thank me? So this has been our regular conversation. There was no doubt about these things not happening, or it's always been a given. Yeah, you dream, you make it happen.
I love
So
it.
we were very
I love it. One of the things that made me really happy when I walked into my own daughter's room when she was like 14 or 15 years old was she put up a poster on the wall that said, the only regret you would have in life for the things you didn't do.
Oh, wow.
Not the things you did do. And I thought, okay, this is going to be a great kid. It
Yes.
just reminds me of like what the thing that your parents infused you with as well. And that made me super happy. Anyway, go ahead.
It makes a world of difference in how you really live your life
Agreed.
and what you set to achieve. I mean, we may not always get where we want to go, but the fact that we even tried, that makes a huge difference.
Exactly.
If you don't try, the rate of failure, like you say, is 100%.
Yeah, and I think I whispered into my daughter's ear as she was growing up, like, have no fear, just like continuously. So
Yeah.
it just became a thing that she thought.
Yeah. So, Michael, like Nirmal said, we've been friends, and that's been a great, as kids, that's first of all a rare thing. I mean, we want to kill each other, of course, half the time, but the other half time we are great friends working together.
Yeah.
And the fact that we've learned to work together has played into our output and what we come up with.
For sure.
And we've been all the more lucky because we've always gone ahead and made friends like family all our life. So, and the fact that these friends are now our partners and part of the structure that's been set up is for us hugely gratifying. And because it's friends coming together and creating these IPs in the world, we are sitting on a gold mine of IPs and games. Everyone's invested the same way. It's not just me and Nirmal. Everybody's there to say their stories, and it's their company, and it's amazing. And we have like we talked about Botrod's the IP with the multiple verticals. Then we have another platformer IP, and we have the action adventure IP. And apart from that, and that's all just phase one. We also have a mobile division, which is churning out 4 mobile games as we speak. And our phase 2 has another huge explorer / building IP being developed and produced. So I think this all comes from getting to work with friends and friends like family. So that's been the biggest joy of creating Hobo Interactive and looking forward to what's going to happen in the next 10 years.
One thing that's really important in what Swapna said right now is, there are people who might think your vision is good and they might back you. But when people join your vision and become part of it, it's like the community thing in gaming, right? There's nothing more satisfying that, when that happens. And I think that we've been very lucky.
Okay, I really want to thank both of you for doing this. This has been an insanely great conversation. And to be fair, I've learned a ton. I love talking to people that are deeply immersed in a business in which I'm not operating, because I get a much different perspective on it. And to be fair, our listeners get a different perspective on it as well. Swapna and Nirmal David, the co-founders of Hobo Interactive. That was truly awesome. Thank you so much for your time today for doing this.
Thank you so much for having us, Michael. It's been amazing talking to you. You made it very easy and it was fantastic. Thank you so much.
It was great. I got to insult Swapna a little bit on air, which is great too.